Hi guys, Robbie46 here, and today I want to talk about the race results and analysis for yesterday's MotoGP race at Misano. And a bit like Silverstone a few weeks ago, the race unfolded in quite a dramatic fashion, some of which started on Saturday during qualifying. Valentino Rossi was awarded a penalty point for being slow on the racing line and held up Lorenzo a little bit. Lorenzo, well, the lap that Lorenzo was on wasn't as good as his previous best, so he didn't really affect him that much, but at the end of the day, rules are rules, so Rossi got a penalty point, but Lorenzo did take pole from Marc Marquez and Valentino Rossi in third. Obviously, Rossi's home race, big crowd, and the pressure was on him to perform. So straight off the bat, Lorenzo, as you'd expect, took the lead, and it was Marquez who stayed second, and Bradley Smith actually went into third momentarily before quickly being retaken by Rossi. And the top three started to pull away pretty much straight away. Pedrosa was down a little bit, and the two Ducatis were fighting amongst themselves as well. And then a few laps in, Rossi caught him back up, and it was still a three-way battle. And then all hell broke loose with 19 laps to go. It was spitting on the start grid, but not much. Not enough to warrant a wet race. The white flags were out pretty much from the start to say that the riders could come in and change bike whenever they feel they wanted to. And yeah, the rain started with 19 laps to go. It caught a few people out, one of which being Michele Pirro, a Ducati's test rider. He qualified really well, but unfortunately the tricky conditions got the better of him and he went down. Unfortunately, Yoni Hernandez went down, taking Alex De Angelis with him, and that's when the track started to get really wet, and everyone started on slicks. So it was time for everyone to go into the pits and go straight onto wet tyres. So everyone came into the pits, apart from Bradley Smith, who thought he'd wait a little bit later to come in to change onto wets. This is where Rossi lost quite a bit of time. He went into the pit right behind Marquez and Lorenzo, but changing bike, he was a bit slower than the other two, so exiting pit he was a little bit behind the two at the front, and the gap actually went up to 3.6 seconds with their first lap on the wet tyres, and it looked like it was just going to be a battle between Lorenzo and Marquez, but a few laps later Rossi started to close him down quite dramatically, half a second a lap up to 0.7 of a second a lap quicker until we got up to Marquez. It stopped raining by this point. Bradley Smith had yet to come into pit lane, and Scott Redding actually crashed quite early on after changing to wet tyres as he locked the front up. Managed to keep it upright, but went into the gravel and had a relatively slow crash, so he got back up and started going again. And then yeah, the track started drying again. Lorenzo went a bit wide, which meant that Marquez was going to go into the lead, but Marquez sat up and let both Lorenzo and Rossi past him, so Lorenzo went back into the lead, Rossi second and Marquez third, and Marquez was playing a bit of a tactic, which, to be honest, I don't blame him. He wanted to see what the other riders were doing ahead of him, because a few riders started to pit again to go back out onto the track with slick tyres, because Bridgestone has said, because they had no wet testing or practice at Misano. They didn't know how the wet tyres were going to hold up, so they sent all of the riders out on the soft wet tyres. And then Loris Baz was one of the first people to pit. By this point, Bradley Smith hadn't pitted at all, so he was still on slicks. Scott Reddin soon after came into pit from Loris Baz, and a few more riders started to come in, and the track was drying more and more, and then Bradley Smith started going about 8 to 9 seconds a lap quicker than the front three. Now by this point, both of the Yamahas were still on wets, and so was Marquez, and all of their pit crews were telling all three of them to pit, but they weren't having none of it. Rossi went into the lead, overtook Lorenzo, and started to pull out quite a big gap. Marquez had dropped back by about 1.5 seconds here. He was dropping back as well. The state of the front of the wet tyres started to look really ragged, and Marquez decided to pit, and Lorenzo was watching Rossi, as he would do, being the closest championship contender, and Rossi and Lorenzo both decided to stay out despite both their pit boards telling them to pit. Then Marquez, like I said, he pitted, came back out, and he was in, I think it was about 4th, I believe, and started going really quickly, and he was going 9 seconds a lap quicker than both Rossi and Lorenzo. Lorenzo eventually then pitted, but Rossi decided to stay out for one more lap. By this point, Marquez had done a full lap on the slick tyres, got him up to temperature, and was starting to get that gap down. It was down to like 10 seconds, 15 seconds, sorry, and Marquez was going 9 seconds a lap quicker, and there was still 9 laps to go. So Lorenzo came out the pits, and obviously came out on slicks and started to go quicker as well. And then Rossi decided to pit on with lap 8 laps to go, sorry, and that's when Lorenzo saw on the on one of the big screens that Rossi had pitted and decided to push, and Lorenzo ended up crashing. It was quite a big crash, and unfortunately wrote his bike off, so he couldn't get back on and continue the race. By this point, Marquez had taken the lead and had a massive lead over Bradley Smith, who was now 2nd, and it was actually Loris Baz who was in 3rd, but in the closing stages of the race, Scott Reddin, who was in the gravel a bit early on and crashed, caught up to Loris Baz and overtook Baz and took 3rd place. Rossi came out of pits. He had Danilo Petrucci breathing down his neck, 1.3 seconds behind him, but Rossi did manage to fend off Petrucci in 6th. Pedrosa was a bit quiet all race, as were the Suzukis really, but with 2 laps to go, Pol Espargaro ended up crashing out of the race. And then that was it. That was job done. So Marc Marquez took the win ahead of Bradley Smith and Scott Reddin in 3rd. Really good to see 2 Brits on the podium. Bradley Smith having a previous podium last year, and Scott Reddin his first GP podium in the top class. And good for Loris Baz as well, who came in 4th. Top open bike by quite a margin. He finished ahead of Valentino Rossi, who came home in 5th. Danilo Petrucci was 6th. Andrea Iannone came home in 7th, just ahead of his teammate Dovizioso in 8th. Danny Pedrosa came home in 9th, ahead of Alicia Spargaro in 10th. Cal Crutchlow, another disappointing race for him, came home in 11th. Not that well, about 5 seconds behind him was his teammate on the Open Honda, Jack Miller, in 12th. Mike DiMeglio came home in 13th. Maverick Vinales was 14th, and Alvaro Bautista took the last point in 15th. 16th was Stefan Bradl. Nicky Hayden was 17th. 18th was Hector Barbera. 19th was Eugene Laverty. 20th was Claudio Corti, and 21st, and the last of the finishers, was Carol Abraham. So that was a really dramatic race, really interesting to watch as well. But what has that done to the championship? Well, even though Rossi only managed a 5th place, he has extended his lead to 23 points over Jorge Lorenzo, and Marquez is 40 points behind Lorenzo now. So if Lorenzo carries on having a bit of bad luck, then Marquez can easily overtake him and take second in the championship. First place is excuse me, still a bit out of reach at the moment, but we'll have to wait and see what happens at the next race in Aragon, where Rossi and Lorenzo had recently just done a test as well. And if I remember rightly, that was a bit of a hectic race last year as well, when it started off dry and then pissed down with rain. Both Repsol Hondas decided to stay out in the wet on slicks. Both ended up crashing. Rossi crashed because he almost went into the back of Pedrosa, and then he hit a wet patch. And Lorenzo took the win. So it's going to be interesting next race as well. This championship is getting more dramatic race by race, and yeah, we're set up for a great finish, guys. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave this video a like, subscribe to my channel for more content, and I shall see you guys in the next video. See you!